I refused to cancel my job interview just to take my sister to the mall. Dad shoved me against the wall. Her dreams mattered. Mine never did. So I walked away, and they lost everything. My name is Leona. I'm 24 years old, and on that Tuesday morning in September, I genuinely believed, maybe, just maybe, my life was finally turning a corner. I had an interview, not just any interview. An actual, legitimate interview with Vertex Digital, one of the fastest-growing tech startups in Chicago. The kind of opportunity I'd been praying for since I graduated 3 years ago. After grinding through retail shifts at Target, babysitting gigs that paid barely enough for gas, and serving tables at a diner where the regulars tipped in loose change, I finally had one real shot at a job that could change everything. I woke up at 6:30, 2 hours before I needed to. I laid out my clothes on the bed: navy blazer, crisp white blouse, gray slacks I'd bought on clearance and had tailored to fit perfectly. I steamed every wrinkle out of that blazer. I practiced my answers in the bathroom mirror until my voice sounded confident instead of desperate. And for the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar rising in my chest: hope. Real, tangible hope instead of the dull ache of dread I'd grown so used to. My younger sister Brianna strolled into my bedroom around 9:30. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She had a venti caramel macchiato from Starbucks in one hand and designer sunglasses perched on her head indoors. Like she thought she was some Instagram influencer with 1 million followers instead of a 21-year-old college dropout living off our parents' credit cards. "I need you to drive me to Oakbrook Mall by noon," she announced, her tone flat and entitled, like she was giving instructions to hired help. I zipped up my leather portfolio case slowly, buying myself a second to stay calm. "I can't. My interview is at 12:30 downtown." She blinked twice, like the words confused her. "No, take me first. I told Ashley and Kennedy I'd meet them there. You can just call your little interview people and reschedule." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "You want me to cancel a job interview I've been waiting 3 months for, so you can go shopping for makeup with your friends?" She rolled her eyes dramatically, the way she always did when she didn't get her way immediately. "You've literally applied to like 1,000 jobs before. You'll get another interview. My friends are only all free today." She turned and walked out of my room like the decree had been signed and sealed. I followed her downstairs, my pulse already starting to race. "Brianna, I'm not missing this interview, absolutely not." She stopped at the bottom of the staircase and smirked at me over her shoulder. That smirk, cold and sharp. "I'll tell Dad." My stomach dropped instantly. Because Brianna had always weaponized our father like a loaded gun, she didn't even have to aim properly. She just pointed and pulled the trigger, and I was always the one bleeding on the floor. 2 minutes later, Dad stormed into the kitchen like he'd been summoned from the depths of hell itself, his voice already raised before he'd even finished crossing the room. "What's this garbage I'm hearing? You're refusing to take your sister where she needs to go." "I have my interview today," I said quietly, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "This is the first real shot I've gotten in months." Dad laughed. It was mean, cruel, mocking. The kind of laugh that made you feel small and worthless without him even having to explain why. "Your sister actually has a real future, Leona. She needs to maintain her social connections. Those girls she's meeting? Their parents own businesses. They have money, influence, networks that matter. Ashley's father runs a private equity firm. Kennedy's mother sits on the board at Northwestern. These relationships are investments." I felt my chest tighten like someone was wrapping wire around my ribs. "So my life doesn't matter? My goals, my opportunities, none of that counts for anything?" His face darkened. He took 2 heavy steps toward me, closing the distance until he was inches from my face, and I could smell the coffee on his breath. "Her future matters," he said, his voice dropping to something low and vicious. "Yours never did." Before I could even process those words, before I could breathe or step back or defend myself, he shoved me backward. Hard. Violently. I slammed against the hallway wall so forcefully that the air punched out of my lungs. My back burned instantly from the impact. My shoulder cracked against the picture frame hanging behind me, a family photo from some Christmas years ago when we all still pretended to be happy. The frame shattered. Glass tinkled onto the hardwood floor. My knees buckled and I slid halfway down the wall before catching myself. Brianna stood by the kitchen counter, leaning casually, chewing gum and scrolling through her phone like this was entertainment. Like watching our father assault me was just another boring Tuesday morning. Mom finally walked in from the laundry room. She didn't gasp. She didn't rush to help me. She didn't even look surprised. She just gave me that look, the disappointed, exhausted stare she reserved exclusively for me, like I was the problem child who engineered chaos deliberately. "Why do you always have to cause trouble?" she muttered, shaking her head slowly. I didn't speak. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I just held my breath and tried to push myself back up from the floor, my shoulders screaming in pain. Dad stood over me, his shadow blocking the morning light coming through the kitchen window. "You will take her," he said. "That interview means nothing. Nobody important wants you anyway." I looked up at him from the floor, and something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like a fuse melting instead of a bomb exploding. He wasn't just choosing Brianna again. He wasn't just prioritizing her comfort over my career. He was declaring, out loud, in front of everyone, that my entire life was worthless. I stood up slowly, feeling every bruise forming on my back and shoulder. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Right now. For my interview." Dad barked out another cruel laugh. "Try it. Walk out that door and you'll regret it." Brianna smirked. Mom crossed her arms. I picked up my car keys from the counter and walked toward the front door. Dad blocked it. For a moment, standing there in that doorway with my father's body blocking my exit, I genuinely felt like I was trapped in a cage with people who wanted me powerless forever. People who needed me broken to feel whole. I stared directly into his eyes, refusing to look away, refusing to flinch. "I'm going to this interview whether you approve or not." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call him. I called someone else. Someone who'd been telling me for years that I deserved better than this. And she answered immediately. "Harper?" I said, my voice shaking but determined. "I need help." Because this time, I wasn't doing this alone. This time, they'd underestimated exactly how far I was willing to go to stop being disposable. When the call connected and Harper's voice came through, warm, concerned, immediately ready, I walked straight past my father, like he was just furniture blocking the hallway. He tried to grab my arm again, his fingers closing around my wrist, but I twisted out of his grip with more force than I knew I had and stepped outside before he could slam the door shut. I walked down the driveway while he yelled behind me, his voice getting louder and more desperate, like a man who couldn't believe his control wasn't working anymore, like a dictator watching his subjects finally revolt. The person I'd called was Harper Bennett, my college roommate from DePaul University. The only person who'd ever told me my dreams weren't stupid. She worked in human resources at a different branch of Vertex Digital, the same company I was interviewing with today. I'd never wanted to use her connections because I'd always wanted to earn things myself, to prove I could make it on my own merit. But today wasn't about pride anymore. Today was about survival. Today was about getting free. The September wind outside was cold and sharp, cutting through my blazer, but it felt 1,000 times safer than the suffocating air inside that house. Harper answered on the second ring. "Leona, are you okay?" She sounded breathless, like she could hear the danger through the phone. "No, but I will be," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I need a ride to my interview. He's trying to stop me from going. He pushed me." "Harper," He actually pushed me into a wall. She didn't hesitate for even a second. Text me your address right now. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't go back inside. Stay visible. Stay where neighbors can see you. I walked to the sidewalk at the end of the driveway, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, my hands trembling as I texted her the address. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't trembling from fear. I was trembling because my entire system was realizing I'd finally chosen myself. My parents stayed inside the house. They didn't come out. They didn't chase me. They did what they always did when punishment and intimidation didn't land the way they expected. They went silent. But it was the silence of people planning retaliation. I knew they weren't done. They never gave up control that quietly. Harper pulled up in her silver Honda CR-V exactly 14 minutes later, right on schedule. She rolled down the passenger window and looked at me with eyes that already knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. "What did they do this time?" she asked, as I climbed in and buckled my seatbelt with shaking hands. "They tried to force me to cancel my interview so I could drive Brianna to the mall. When I refused, Dad shoved me into the wall and told me my future never mattered." I pulled my blazer aside slightly to show her my shoulder, already darkening with bruises shaped like fingerprints. Harper didn't react with shock. She reacted with pure, focused anger. "I'm going to help you get this job, Leona," she said, her voice steady and certain. "And then you are never, ever going back to them again. Do you understand me?" We drove downtown toward the Loop, and she helped me rehearse my final question responses. She adjusted my collar. She handed me a bottle of water and made me drink half of it to calm my nerves. She kept saying over and over, "You earned this. They don't get to stop you today. Not this time." The Vertex Digital office was located in a sleek glass tower on Walker Drive. Everything was modern steel and white marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. Everything my parents had always insisted I'd never belong in. That people like me didn't deserve to even walk through those doors. My interview lasted 49 minutes, 3 panel members, technical questions, behavioral scenarios, portfolio review, and I crushed it. Every single question, every presentation slide, every moment of eye contact and confident body language I'd practiced. When I walked out of that conference room for the first time in my entire life, I actually believed I belonged somewhere. We got back into Harper's car, and my phone had exploded with notifications. 12 texts from Brianna, all of them venomous. "You just cost me everything. Ashley and Kennedy left without me because you were selfish. You're so dead when you come home. I hope that job spits you out like the trash you are." I stared at the messages for a long moment, then typed back one single line. "I'm not coming home." And I meant it with every fiber of my being. Harper took me back to her apartment in Lakeview and insisted I stay the night. When I showered and changed into clean clothes she'd lent me, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and stared at my shoulder. The bruise now fully formed and purple-black, shaped exactly like my father's hand. It looked like a brand, a mark of ownership, a fingerprint of who they'd always expected me to remain. But tomorrow, I wouldn't wake up as their possession anymore. That night, around 11 o'clock, Harper walked into the living room holding her laptop, her face serious and tense, not excited. "Leona," she said carefully, "I need you to look at something." My heart immediately started racing again. Something was wrong. She sat down beside me and opened an internal email thread she'd received through the company's HR system. And what I read made my blood run cold. The email was from Curtis Williams, the hiring director who'd interviewed me. He wanted to schedule a follow-up call for the next morning. That part was good news. But then Harper scrolled down to show me another message, this one marked confidential, sent between recruiters on the internal system. Her father called the office this afternoon. He told us she's mentally unstable and dangerous to hire. Said she's unpredictable and has violent tendencies. He claimed she attacked him this morning before the interview and that we should be aware she poses a potential liability risk. He strongly recommended we remove her from consideration. My ribs went completely numb. The room tilted slightly. My own father had called Vertex Digital and tried to sabotage me. He'd tried to destroy my reputation, poison my chances, ruin my name before I'd even gotten my call back. They didn't just want to control my future anymore. They wanted to obliterate it before it could even begin. Harper looked at me with fire blazing in her eyes. They just crossed a line you can't ignore anymore, Leona. They're not going to stop. If you don't fight back strategically, intelligently, they will destroy your career before it even starts. This wasn't about one job anymore. This was about making absolutely certain they never had the power to sabotage me again. So that night, sitting at Harper's small kitchen table with mugs of chamomile tea, we weren't actually drinking, we planned. Not some poetic revenge, not a symbolic message that depended on karma or silence. We planned a direct, realistic counterstrike that would hit them exactly where they lived, and exactly where they thought I was powerless. This time, they were going to face consequences that actually changed their lives. And I already knew precisely which part of their carefully constructed world I was going to burn first. When I woke up the next morning, the fear had been replaced by something cold and sharp and hungry: clarity. Harper handed me a folder stuffed with printouts, the recruiter's confidential message, a transcript of my father's phone call to HR, which they'd recorded as standard procedure for all external communications, screenshots of Brianna's threatening texts from the day before, and a detailed timeline showing my father had called the Vertex office 3 separate times, trying to interfere with my candidacy. She slid a small digital recorder across the table. "You recorded all this?" I asked, stunned. "No," Harper said. "They did. Your father called the main HR line again last night at 9:40 p.m. and left a rambling voicemail trying to paint you as unstable. The night shift recruiter forwarded it to compliance with a concerned note this morning." I pressed play on the recording. My father's voice filled the kitchen, slurred slightly, he'd been drinking, and absolutely venomous. He referenced his position on the Greater Chicago Chamber of Commerce Advisory Board. He name-dropped his employer, Caldwell and Associates Consulting. He made vague threats about business relationships and professional consequences if they hired me. It was sloppy, obscene, and completely, irrefutably documented. Harper looked at me and said, "They can't ignore this. It's policy violation number 1. If he's calling companies making fraudulent claims, misrepresenting candidates, using his professional position to threaten hiring decisions, that's not just unethical, that's actionable." I felt the old panic trying to crawl up my throat, hot and familiar, but I swallowed it down. We drafted a formal complaint, professional, clinical, emotionless. We attached the voicemail recording, the recruiter's concerned note, the transcript of all 3 phone calls my father had made, and a detailed timeline showing his repeated interference. Harper filed it through Vertex Digital's corporate compliance channels. Then, carefully and quietly, she also notified Caldwell and Associates, the consulting firm where my father worked, that one of their senior staff members was making harassment calls to external companies in an attempt to damage hiring decisions. I watched her click send on that email. And for the first time in my entire life, it felt like I was finally using my intelligence as a weapon instead of my tears. Within 48 hours, Vertex Digital's HR department responded. They'd opened an internal investigation and temporarily suspended any external liaison work with Caldwell and Associates, pending their review of the situation. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate. I simply sat in Harper's tiny kitchen and breathed through the ache I'd been carrying in my chest for 24 years. 2 weeks later, Curtis Williams called me personally for a private meeting at a cafe near the office. He apologized profusely for what had happened. He offered me the position, junior project coordinator, $58,000 a year with benefits, and a relocation stipend if I needed it. He explained that my formal complaint had triggered a chain reaction throughout the company's vendor network. Caldwell and Associates, the firm my father consulted for, had begun its own internal ethics review. The Greater Chicago Chamber of Commerce, where Dad loved to posture and network and act important, was now asking very pointed questions about his conduct and whether his advisory position should be reconsidered. 1 month after that, a thin envelope arrived at Harper's apartment addressed to me. It was a letter from Caldwell and Associates' legal department, stating they could no longer justify my father's external advisory contract due to repeated ethical complaints and conduct violations that reflected poorly on the firm's reputation. Gerald Hartwell, my father, had been stripped of his lucrative consulting contract and removed from the Chamber of Commerce committee where he'd spent years building his professional image. Mom called me exactly once that week. Her voice was tight with panic, not the practiced calm of accusation I'd grown up hearing. "Leona, we need your help. We don't know what to do. Your father's lost his consultancy. The mortgage payment is due, and we're struggling. You have to understand, we're family." I listened to her for exactly 30 seconds, then said calmly, "You made choices. You can figure out how to fix them yourselves." She begged. She tried manipulation and tears and all the old scripts that used to fold me like paper, so I replied with one sentence: "You don't get to set my life on fire and then ask me to save you from the smoke." I moved into my own studio apartment in Pilsen 2 weeks later. It was small, just 500 square feet, but it was mine. The bruise on my shoulder had faded to yellow-green, barely visible, but my mind was finally, blessedly clear. Brianna sent angry messages for about a week before they faded into silence. Dad's voice on the phone changed completely. The commanding bark I'd grown up fearing became small and sharp with desperation when he called demanding answers about his lost contracts, his ruined reputation, his destroyed career. I listened to exactly 15 seconds of it before hanging up. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't silent. It wasn't about karma or justice or waiting for the universe to balance itself. It was about practical consequences that hit their livelihood, their pride, their social standing, and their ability to manipulate other people with status and connections. And for the first time since I was a little girl, I slept through entire nights without jolting awake, waiting for a storm to come crashing through my bedroom door. They'd taught me I had no value. I taught them that value can be reclaimed with truth, documentation, and refusing to let yourself be used as currency. When the final email came from Curtis Williams officially welcoming me to the Vertex Digital team and offering me a relocation package to transfer to their Austin, Texas office. If I wanted a complete fresh start, I smiled and closed my laptop. I didn't call my parents to tell them. I didn't send a triumphant text to Brianna. I didn't post about it on social media or make any grand announcements. I simply booked a one-way Amtrak ticket to Austin 3 days later and started packing the few belongings I actually cared about. Harper helped me load everything into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. We stood in her apartment doorway on a cold October morning, and she hugged me tighter than anyone ever had. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually got free." "We did it," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." She smiled, wiping her eyes. "Go build the life you deserve, Leona, and don't you dare look back." I took the train south through Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, and finally into Texas. 24 hours of watching America roll past my window while I listened to music and read and simply existed without fear for the first time in my adult life. When I arrived in Austin and stepped off the train into the warm November sunshine, I pulled out my phone and saw one final text from my mother. "Please, we're your family. You can't just abandon us like this." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed back slowly, carefully. "You abandoned me every single day of my life. I'm just finally returning the favor." I blocked all their numbers. Every single one. I started my new job the following Monday in a bright, modern office filled with people who saw my potential instead of my utility, people who valued my ideas instead of my obedience. And every single morning when I woke up in my small Austin apartment, made coffee in my own kitchen, and got ready for work without waiting for someone to tell me I was worthless, I felt something unfamiliar growing stronger inside me. Not just hope, not just freedom, but something fiercer, the absolute certainty that I would never, ever let anyone make me feel disposable again. They thought they owned me. I proved I owned myself, and I never looked back.